1. What is up, everyone? Interesting conversation going on in the chat with a user temporarily suspended. Maybe a trolling type thing, but regardless, welcome everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Learning Quick, and welcome to Lee Robinson for coming on the channel today. I've watched a bunch of your Next videos. I haven't gone through all of your courses, but I have them ready for when I actually get free time. And we're here to talk about Next.js as a whole, and then authentication as kind of a subcategory with that as well. So anyway, welcome. Thanks for coming on. And do you want to give a little bit of intro to yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, yeah, thanks for having me on. Super excited to talk about all things Next and authentication and anything else that comes up. We'll see what people want to talk about in the chat. Yeah. But yeah, a little background on myself. I am a solutions architect at Vercel. I've been at Vercel for about a month. And prior to that, I worked in the e-commerce industry as well as some fintech. And I've been doing that for about 6 years, and I love it. Probably I'd say about 2 years ago, I started getting into doing online courses and kind of combining my hobby of videography and programming and putting content out there. And that's kind of taken off. And I now have 2 courses. One's Mastering Next.js and the other one is React 2025.
Okay, yeah. Sweet. Yeah, very cool. Which, by the way, I might have seemingly put a disrespectful comment in the chat. Someone said, "Who is he?" after they were joking about you being the important person, I think, on this stream and not me. So I thought they were referring to me, and I said no one. So I didn't mean to demean you as a guest. That wasn't intended to be that way. So just to be clear for everyone, including you and everyone in the chat. Yeah, Tech Gadget, while Lee has this new guy James on his stream. Anyway, so this is your stream, so feel free to do whatever you want with this today. So you said you started with you said Next.js started about 2 years ago, is that right? Your experience?
I started using Next probably about 2 years ago. We brought it in at the company that I worked at previously, which is called Hy-Vee, which is a regional grocery company in the Midwest United States. And I was working on the e-commerce platform online, and we had an old C# application that we were trying to migrate to React and more JavaScript, and we needed server-side rendering. And at the time, Next.js seemed like the best option because we were already trying to bring in React, but then we wanted to keep the benefits of SEO.
Sure.
And it made Next a great fit. And that's really when I started diving into the weeds, learning a lot more about Next, and eventually kind of transforming what I'd learned and kind of learning in public, putting it online and making courses with it too.
Cool. Yeah, I've loved Next, and I've heard about it for years. At the time, I was hearing about like a year and a half ago or so, I was hearing about Gatsby and Next. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just picked one. I didn't know enough to really know what the differences were. So I just kind of picked Gatsby. I stuck with Gatsby for a while. I heard about Next, was interested, and only in the last really month or so have I started spending time with it. I've done a couple of videos myself. I did a mini course on the L0 channel, which people should check out. And a lot of the stuff that I've kind of learned, especially on the authentication space, has been watching your videos, which is like a big reason for bringing you on. So I want to do a little bit more about your background. Then we've already got a question about like server-side rendering versus client-side rendering in terms of authentication, which is kind of the crux of this whole thing, I think. But so what are you doing now as title as an architect, right, at Vercel?
Yeah. So solutions architect is my title, and really what that entails, like we have a pretty small company, so everyone is very multifaceted, working across a lot of different things. So right now, Next.js conference is on the 27th. So the countdown is on, and countdown's on, and we're trying to push through. And I've pretty much been devoted to that since I started. But once the world gets back to normal after that, part of my time is spent working with clients and helping onboard them with Vercel and Next, and teach them the proper way of doing things in the Next world and the Vercel serverless world, and help migrate their applications to use our products. And then the other half is kind of helping with the Next.js community and, writing blog posts or making videos or, listening to customer feedback or customer complaints and trying to just make it a better experience for everyone, really.
So, it sounds like, you've got developer experience, DevRel stuff kind of built into your job with the content and taking the feedback from people and passing on a product. but you would also be, as part of that architect role, um, kind of helping people get the high level strategy of what they're going to do to onboard and what things make sense where and that sort of stuff. Anyway, that's super cool. I ended my career 3 years at 3.5 at FedEx. I started as a software developer, ended as a solutions architect, and this was across like several of the applications we had and just kind of figuring out like modernization efforts and what technologies we could leverage and how best to make these things fit together in a sustainable way going forward. So it's really cool. I think from my perspective, for you now, you're like really on the bleeding edge for a lot of companies that if they're moving this way, they're probably moving from something that's been around for a while. And they're different concepts. There's different things at play. There's different ways you break out code and projects and applications and stuff. Anyway, so that sounds really exciting to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with working. Like, I feel like you have to have prior experience really in the weeds, understanding how you evolve these kind of legacy applications. And especially at really large companies like a FedEx, or like, they have lots of old code, and they're constantly trying to figure out, how do we do it better? How do we slowly migrate to the new hotness, or whatever people are using now? And I think being like in the weeds and being hands-on with that experience really gives you a solid real world understanding of not just like the small tutorials you read online, but what it actually takes to migrate a large application.
And that is, now I'm backtracking, because now I'm like specifically DevRel, where I'm literally like, take this to-do app, and like that's how you do it, right? And then it's like kind of hands off from there. And I mentioned this to the team, like I'm missing a little bit of at Auth0, like our higher level use cases for enterprise companies. Like most of the stuff I do is like, here's how you set it up in React, and you're kind of like, from my perspective, good to go. But there's this whole other world of like, and people have done this, you've been through a tutorial, and then it's like the first time you want to do something else, it's like, all right, I still don't quite know what to do there, right? So that's one of the things that I would like to help improve some, just in my background, especially overall at Auth0. But I did get to have a lot of those conversations at FedEx, which was just really cool, I think, to feel like you're a part of like a strategy going forward and kind of getting a vision for teams as they go toward the future.
And as content creators, that's I think one of the most difficult things is figuring out the line between not enough and
too much.
And too much, right? Because you want to give a tutorial that is useful and gives people the context to build real applications, but you also don't want to just drop on them this massive application and they have to look through thousands of lines of code. It's tough.
It's an interesting mix. And we've got some people in the chat that are doing content as well. One, do you know Demetrius Clark? Do you know Dom? Okay. So
we're Twitter mutuals.
So if you know him, he's super big into Next.js. He was one of the reasons why I paid more attention to Next.js and started to get into it. And he mentioned his the MD Next. Dom, if you want to throw a link to that in the chat, feel free. I'd love to. I haven't looked at it in a little bit, so I'd love to see it.
It's super nice. I checked it out, and it has a lot of the opinionated things that I like to do with my Next apps anyway, because I really like Chakra UI. It's such a great framework, especially if you're building a more complex web app. Like, you probably don't want to spend cycles doing and reinventing the wheel with some of the components that you get for free, and they're accessible by default, which is awesome. So I mean, if you like Tailwind and you like that, you'll basically like Chakra.
Okay, very cool. I haven't used Chakra myself, but James Perkins, another content creator in my Discord, created his first course, and it was Next.js Sanity and Chakra UI, and that it's basically how we built his personal site. So that one I thought was pretty cool. One, sorry for Max, who is having internet trouble. He said the first time he's joining my stream and he's having issues. That sucks. I'm sorry. So do you want to dive into, I guess, going back to GM Will's question, authentication authorization on the server side rendered versus client side rendering. So you want to break down, those are kind of the two categories. And while you do this, I'm going to grab a link to your video, which again, I think is the best resource for this specific topic. But what are those two different categories in terms of authentication at this point in the Next.js / React world?
Yeah, so, and I dive into this a little bit in the video, but the high level overview is really, you have two options. You're either going to do authentication on the client side, so client side rendering, or you're going to do it on the server side with server side rendering. And what that typically looks like for client side first is you have some kind of loading shell that gets pre-rendered by the server. And that might be a spinner, or it might be a skeleton if it's a little bit more advanced. And then you kick off that network request to fetch information about a user. And if there isn't a user, you can either redirect away on the client side if it's like a dashboard page or something that you shouldn't be logged, or you shouldn't be able to access unless you're logged in. That's basically on the client side. And then when that request finishes, you have information about the user. Then the flip side of that is on the server. So if you wanted to fetch the information in a blocking way before the page rendered, inside of get server-side props with Next specifically, you can make a request to fetch information about the user or the page or whatever, and then return that as props to the component.
Yeah. So first, like one of the reason I got really interested, and shout out to Tech Gadget for the subscribe. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, yo. We also have to, do you know how to dab? This is completely
like the
yeah. So, all right, we might, now that we're throwing the hints out there, I don't actually have formal redemption things set up in Twitch, but a lot of people redeem dabs and I just go with it. If you have any other like odd requests and you want to put us on the spot a little bit, feel free to throw it in the chat. But the thing that interested me most about Next.js was, like, I look at Gatsby, and Gatsby is not just statically generated pages, although that's kind of what it's mostly known for. And Next.js I thought was more on specifically like the server-side rendering, but it can do all of it, which is why it's so appealing to me. And you can do all of it page by page by just exporting that function. So you've got either with the two new functions, get server-side props or get static props, static side, not static side, get static.
Get static props and get static paths. Those are the two for static generation.
Cool.
And one thing I think it's interesting to touch on here is, you mentioned how it kind of, they added in support for server-side rendering a little bit later in the life, or sorry, static site generation in the life cycle of Next. And when you look at the history of Next.js, it's really interesting to see it evolve, because it evolved kind of with Vercel's product, because they were like the ultimate dog fooding test of that, because they were able to really track and hear from people who are using Next.js and see the patterns in the real world. And what they realized was server-side rendering is great. And there's going to be a ton of use cases for that, especially really large sites where you need to do things like personalization or A/B testing or things like that. But then there's also a very valid use case for static generation. And what they realized is, not only that, there's also this weird third category, which is like static generation at request time. And that's we can dive more into this, but that's what Next has, that's called the incremental static regeneration. So it's really interesting, because a lot of the static site generators in the Jamstack space, most people know that, you code it locally, you have a build process, and then you get some static site, and like that's it, you're done. And they think that if they want to update their content later, they either have to do a full rebuild, or they have to have some kind of webhook that from their CMS or something that kicks everything off again. And the really interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about the static regeneration is, like, it kind of melted my brain the first time I heard about it, because it's this weird like hybrid of both of them, where you can still do a completely static site, but then if I say that my revalidation period is a minute, if that passes, then it's like, oh, I'm just going to go generate a new version of this specific page, and not even the entire site. So then you still have the fast builds and all the benefits of static sites. It's pretty crazy.
So I haven't used this. I know of it. And when I first heard about it, I was like, oh shit, that's wild. But I didn't think about it being like on a page by page basis. That's really, really cool. And again, this is just overall, like, it can do everything is basically what it comes down to. Next can. Go ahead.
Well, I think probably the most interesting use case of it is, if you think about like a massive website with millions of pages, like a crazy large e-commerce site or a crazy large documentation site, you want to statically generate that, right? Because you don't want your pages to ever go down. But if you were to generate all of those at build time, it would take forever. So what you can do with the incremental static generation is, you say, all right, at build time, I want to generate maybe the top 1,000 most hit pages, so that you still have like a 4-minute build or something like that. And then at request time, for, maybe that one docs page that gets one hit a month. When it comes in, it basically hits, makes a server side request, and then statically generates a version of that
Hmm.
page that is now cached. So now every subsequent viewer of that, it was now cached, and they get that static page.
But it's not until you don't do anything with it or for that page until that first request comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, this is, I don't know, like in some ways, the idea of the Jamstack and just the
Mm-hmm.
technologies and stuff that we have, the individual things are not that different. It's just like taking things that we have, things that we already know how to use, and just getting really creative with how we use them. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
that's the epitome of just getting creative. Like building a static page, we can do that. Now deciding when and how and these different like timings of when we do it and how to optimize a really scaled out number of pages for like specific use cases is just really cool. Um, two
But
things. Oh, go
it's
ahead.
also a double-edged sword though, because having that flexibility of being able to do it whichever way you want is great. But then it
A little
also can be
overwhelming.
confusing for
Yeah.
people who are just getting into the ecosystem, because you have all these different tools, but you need to understand how to use those tools and what the
Yep.
applications are, and we can dive more into that too.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think in regards to that, the thing that made Next make so much sense to me, static versus server-side rendered is literally a function that you add or
Mm-hmm.
not add for because it's static by default.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it so clear. And thinking about from the Gatsby perspective, like there's different hooks that you have to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one is harder to associate with like what does this actually lead to versus just like here's a function, it's going to send some information as prompts and it's right there kind of in line, at least for like smaller ones, to that component. So it clicked really for me immediately. And again, I don't have a whole lot of Next experience, but I can at least see those differences in how you set them up pretty easy. Um,
Yeah.
in the
That,
chat, sorry.
yeah. What's in the chat? No, we
And
should answer some things in the chat.
well, first, hello awake Arpan, who still hasn't changed his name back to Sleepy Arpan from like months ago, redeemed a dab. It's kind of a fake redeem, but if you're up for it, we'll do a
right.
dab on here. So
gotta
we'll
sync
do,
it.
yeah. All right, so we'll do countdown of 3, 2, 1. Nailed it. All right, somebody clip that hopefully, and then back to serious stuff. The interesting thing I think about the client side authentication is that's basically the exact same as what you would do in a regular React application, right? Like regardless of
Yeah.
Next, regardless of Gatsby, just React. That's what you would do, is what you explained earlier with the client side authentication.
And I think a lot of people forget that Next is just React.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to forget that because you start looking at all of the really interesting things that you can do on top of it. But at the end of the day, you can do a completely client-side rendered application. You can do a complete single-page application, just like you could with React. And you can use Next just to abstract Webpack and Babel. Like that's it. And you can use Next just for the file system-based routing. Like that's it.
Absolutely.
So it's really like, take and choose whatever you want.
Wholeheartedly agree. One of my recent videos is Gatsby versus Next versus Create React app. And for me, it's like I don't have a reason to ever use just regular Create React app anymore. There's nothing I lose with going to Next. I could build the exact same thing in the exact same way with React. But if I need another page, I don't have to set up React Router like it and a few of the other things you mentioned. And it's kind of that simple. Like it gives you stuff but doesn't take away.
Yeah, really what sold me on Next was after working with a pretty large React application and using React Router a lot. The first time I built a Next application and I used the file system based routing, and I just made a new file and it was a new route, I was just like mind blown.
I remember going, I think early on, before I even actually tried it out, I was just reading through a tutorial and it said like, yeah, just put a file here and that's a page. And I was like, huh? That's really nice. All right, question. So relevant to the idea of client side versus server side, how do you know when to use which one in Next? So this is one of the things where like now you're needing to come with a bigger understanding of what's going on because you have these options, but what are you looking for if you're deciding between client side and server side?
Yeah. So for me, I've seen so many more use cases for static than I could have realized.
Yeah.
a great example is that I spend a lot of time with now is the Vercel dashboard. Like it's
Makes
all
sense.
behind a user flow, and you would think that you would probably need to do server side generate or server side rendering for that, but
Hmm.
actually, it's all static generated, and the requests come on the client side using the SWR library, which is pretty neat if you haven't
Cool.
checked that out. But then
Just barely.
there's a really cool tip here that I think that some people might not realize, which is when you log in to your application, you can set a cookie saying that the user's logged in. And then when you try to go to a protected route that's doing client side authentication, when that page loads, you can check for the cookie in the head of the pre rendered content. And if it doesn't exist, then you can redirect immediately. So when you do
Hmm.
this, it prevents one of the downsides of client side authentication, which is I go to a dashboard page and there's like a flicker of the application and then it redirects,
Yep.
right? So I found that really interesting because I never really thought about that for solving that problem, but it works pretty well.
So you're able, instead of, so what you're saying, I think, is like you can check a cookie faster than you could making an API request to your backend to figure out if you're logged in. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Also, you don't have to wait for like React to boot up and make that check.
Hmm.
In React land, you can do it just in good old HTML,
Oh,
JavaScript, and the
yeah.
head tag.
Oh, just a regular JavaScript tag. And then,
Yep.
okay.
So
So
like
when, yeah.
more tangibly with Next.js, you can use next head to control the head
Uh huh.
tag in HTML.
Yeah.
So inside of there, you can just put a little script that checks your for your
Hmm.
cookies. And if that cookie is not there, then you just set like window dot location to be
Slash login or whatever.
log in. Yeah. So then you just
Ha.
completely skip that whole like shell where
Right.
there's your application but you're not logged in.
And it's a hassle. Like I've got this on, I don't know if you've seen this on Twitter. I haven't, I've posted some, but this dev desk site that I've been working on, just
Hmm.
a place for people to post like pictures of their setups. And right now I started with just regular React and serverless with Netlify and their serverless functions.
Hmm.
And after I started getting into Next.js after, and I was like, damn, I should have done this in Next, because I don't handle that blip that well.
Hmm.
There's kind of like the overall loading for the page, and then there's also like loading for individual components or pieces of data, and I don't
Hmm.
feel like it's that great of a user experience the way that it's set up right now. So
Hmm.
like you're saying, like you can kind of just negate both of those by doing a combination of server side routing, in the sense that like well, I guess it's not necessarily dependent upon server side routing, but when you log in you get that cookie, and then now on the front end you can check, and then you're basically at that point kind of throwing React out of the window until
Hmm.
you go through the login process and come back and you're logged in,
Hmm.
and then like here's React.
Hmm.
That's cool.
So that's client side, but there's still always going to be use cases where people want to do completely server side rendering, where like they're checking for a bear token or something
Yeah.
if they're using a jot, and then otherwise do like an actual HTTP redirect on the server. And I think probably the two most common use cases I've seen for this generally involve large scale sites, and it's things like A/B testing or personalization.
Mm.
So I want to customize the markup of this page. If you think about e-commerce, like I want to customize it and show things based on the user that's logged in. And I also am doing an A/B test
Yeah.
on like the primary call to action. And in that
Okay.
case, it's just sure you could probably do it client side, but it's probably easier at that scale to just do
Sure.
it all on the server side.
Okay. And I think like one of the other implications is like the SEO value, right? And I think the
Hmm.
important thing is to know that you choose, like based on the individual page or set of pages,
Hmm.
which one of these things you want. So you
Hmm.
probably are wanting to do everything static. Well, so there's a difference. I guess in the static category, there's a difference. You can send like a true static page, which is like there's no hydration on top of it.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
like SEO ready. It's like ready to go.
Yep.
Server side render will kind of be the same thing. The opposite of that is if you're doing client side authentication slash routing, and you're
Hmm.
having to like you ship and you get that loading thing, whatever it is, but then
Hmm.
you're pulling in data dynamically. So if you needed some sort of SEO value around that content, you'd
Hmm.
probably want that to be more purely static. I don't know how to differentiate this, but purely
Yeah.
static or server side rendered, right?
Yeah. So I would say for most applications out there, when people log in, they're now in a completely authenticated state.
Yeah.
And like these are like dashboard pages
Hmm.
or like things where SEO doesn't matter.
Right.
And in that case, then you're probably better off going static and then just doing client side requests to fetch your user information.
Sure.
But then even going back to e-commerce, which is always a great example, like if you have a homepage that is like a hybrid auth, like you can visit this page if you're not logged in. You can also visit this page if you're logged in. And if you're logged in, you still want pre-rendered content from the server.
Hmm.
That's kind of the term that we use,
Yeah.
pre-rendered. So it's like because pre-rendered could be statically generated or server
Or
side
okay,
rendered.
sure.
Like you're
Yeah.
you're getting the markup from the server.
Right.
So if you
Okay.
want that pre-rendered content with still great SEO and you want it customized to the user, now you're getting into, okay, do I want to do server side rendering so I can get that personalized thing,
Yep.
or do I want to serve up all of the content for SEO and then on the client side load in like in the nav bar like the user's
Yeah.
avatar and their information and stuff like
Username
that.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's so it's just really cool to have all these options, I guess. I'm way behind in the chat, so I apologize. Arpan said, "Do you believe Next.js is appropriate for web apps, which are different from web pages in terms of how dynamic these two things are?"
Mhm.
Short answer for me is like all of it. That's kind of like my takeaway is it can do any scenario for the most part.
Yeah, there's definitely a good distinction between web apps and web pages. I think a lot of the people who are doing web pages, they 100% need some kind of pre-rendered content,
Hmm.
whether that's statically generated or server-side rendered, probably more statically generated. But then, yeah, for web apps, which maybe fall into the single page app or the client-side rendered category, I still think Next is a good choice simply because I don't really like messing with Babel or Webpack. Like as much as I can, I try to stay away from that.
Yep.
But then the nice thing is there's it, there are the times where you still have to mess with Webpack and you want it to be easy to override and extend things. And that's the thing I like about the way that Next was designed, which is you can pretty easily override Webpack and put in some loader or some crazy plugin or something that you want to do through the Next config, which is nice.
Whatever random stuff you can come up with.
Yeah. Yeah.
um All right, so question from GM Will, what tools do you use for auth with CSR, so client side routing? What do
Mhm.
you recommend or libraries?
Yeah. So I've just doing content for videos. I've tried out quite a
Yeah.
few different ones. I did a course on Firebase, so I'm pretty experienced with Firebase. But Firebase has its, I think it has its own pros and cons. It's definitely great for people who want to do the least amount of setup work and they want to just build something really quickly and get it out there. But
Yeah,
if you have highly relational data, it's probably not the best choice.
sure.
Um, that is if you're going to go with Firestore, which you probably are if you're going to do Firebase authentication.
Hmm.
I've used Auth0 too, which has a really good plugin with Next that I found pretty easy to get set up. And if you're doing any kind of social logins, it's nice that it's like one click to turn those on there, which is
Inside of the
which is really
dashboard.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't, did you know that I think this is okay to say that we're like kind of revamping that library or rethinking that library and
Yeah.
formalizing it a bit more. You may even be part of those conversations, honestly, but I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I think that'll be great.
Yeah.
Just the more seamless we can make that
Hmm.
integration, because I think it's a pretty popular choice for people who use Next.
Yeah.
So yeah. Other than that, Supabase is pretty cool for an open source solution, but it's still like very new. I think it's in alpha right now. Um, those are kind of like your hosted solutions or
Hmm.
your vendors. If you're trying to build your own, the Next Auth library is pretty solid if you want to do social logins or connect to like a Prisma database. And then there's a Next Iron Session, which is another one that does stateless cookies. So if you want to do like email password login, save it as a
Cool.
HTTP only cookie, it works pretty well for that too.
Okay. Sweet. And I haven't looked at Nextauth, but I really like what I've seen. And they also have
Mhm.
a wrapper for Auth0, which is interesting. Like Auth0 has its own library, but this thing has a wrapper for that in addition to other providers.
Hmm.
And you kind of use it the same way. You just configure it for Auth0 instead of the social providers, which you could do in all zero. So it's like maybe it doesn't make a whole
Hmm.
lot of sense, but I thought it was really cool just the idea of like having a bunch of different options. They all use the same hooks. You just configure them with the proper credentials, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the way the library was designed was really smart because it's easy to extend and it's easy to create like custom providers. So there's like that Prisma client or provider or whatever term they use. And
Yeah.
then I didn't even know there was an Auth0 one, but that's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. Um, Sweet. Comment from Arpan going back to like the learning curve of Next.js versus Gatsby.
Hmm.
Gatsby learning curve is so huge, while Next is like, yeah, you learn 3 functions and you're done. And I don't think it's that simple for lots of people who don't understand,
Hmm.
right, the difference between client side and server side and that kind of stuff. But with me not having a huge understanding of that initially, just seeing those 2 functions and like this is how you get data beforehand. This is how you get or in a couple of different ways. Anyway, like it
Hmm.
clicked with me, and I feel like looking back, the amount of learning that I did in Gatsby is more than I've had to do in Next to feel at
Hmm.
least like decently comfortable at this point.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I've found when I'm teaching people, I usually start teaching them, if I'm teaching them React specifically, I'll start teaching them Next because the amount of setup
Hmm.
is the smallest out of any other
Yeah.
solution. So all you need is one file, pages slash index.js, and then export export a function, and then your package JSON to install Next, React, and React DOM.
Hmm.
So like you have 2
Hmm.
files. Like that's so small when you consider even create React app is like pretty small as far as the configuration to get it set up, but just those 2 files and you can immediately start web deving. And it's just
Yeah.
crazy. The more visual tools that come out, like Tailwind, Play, and some of these other
Mm.
visual builders, like you can build your whole layout for people who maybe are just getting into web dev. Just copy paste it and like drop the JSX in a pages dot index or whatever, it's
And
pages slash
be
index, and
yeah.
you're done.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
I think the tooling overall is one of the exciting things for me in web development. And I feel like I haven't been in it that long, but at this point it's been like 4.5 years. But before I got into web dev, I was scared of JavaScript, honestly. Like I came from a .NET and a Java background, and the idea of like JavaScript can basically do like you can do whatever you want. It'll bite you in the ass, but you can do whatever was really intimidating. But the ecosystem and the community and the tools and stuff, I think is just incredible. And that's been kind of my favorite part of being in the ecosystem for the past 4.5 years.
I remember when I got started in web dev and I was doing mostly jQuery, obviously.
Hmm.
but and I remember when I started to first use React, it was so confusing for me because I was also learning like the NPM ecosystem of
Yeah.
things and like how all those things play together with Node, where I was used to just jQuery. It seemed like a lot easier at the time, right? And it seemed like such a huge learning curve to get React down. And now looking back, I don't know if hindsight is 2020 or whatever, but it just seems like we've made so much progress there,
Yep.
especially for beginners getting into the space. The way I look at it
Absolutely.
though is in the space right now, it's as easy as it's ever been to get started. And then like there's a curve that comes down to when you're building like a medium sized application, and then once it goes starts to
Starting
go
to go
back
back.
up on the difficulty level when you start to build the really large applications. But
Yep.
the good thing is like most people aren't building applications that are so large that you have to consider like which crazy state management library do I need, or so yeah.
Yeah. So the idea of like getting into the npm ecosystem and just the tooling, when I was at FedEx, nobody was a web developer. Like everybody had
Hmm.
done like old JSP stuff, if like Java
Hmm.
generated pages and stuff, if you know what that is.
Hmm.
And they had gotten into Angular JS, and at the time there was nothing that we did more than just like importing Angular JS in a script tag, and we didn't have any build process, we didn't have any optimization, we didn't have anything. And when we moved to I think we went straight to Angular 4 plus. There was all these things that like I had known about because I had been watching videos and doing tutorials and building stuff on my own, but the thought of like these people, other developers who like just kind of know JavaScript, and then now you're like, okay, now it's an ecosystem. You've got all these other things to learn, was really intimidating and really difficult of a transition for a lot of people. And honestly, it just kind of takes time. But I was lucky enough to already be kind of immersed and watching tutorials and building stuff on my own, which really helped. But for those people who are seeing that for the first time, is pretty intimidating, I would say.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like the two-way data binding of Angular didn't really click for me at
Mm,
first, and then when I started using React and it had just the component-based like mindset, that actually clicked with me, and I feel like
yeah,
that's when I finally started to grok and understand building web applications. And I think the interesting thing too to me is like React being very unopinionated about the choices you make
yeah,
is its greatest strength and its weakness. And when that started, it really allowed the ecosystem to grow exponentially, and there was different solutions for every part of the stack. And now that that's kind of reversing and we're starting to see more solutions that are completely packaged together, they include routing, they include state management, they include setting up a bundler, and making a really good production build. I think where I see that going in the future is having these abstractions that take care of the stuff that you don't want to do,
yeah,
but still providing developers the tools to extend or override or modify when they need to, because at a certain scale it's kind of inevitable that you'll need to dip into some of those
yeah.
processes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the everlasting balance of like I hate writing boilerplate code. I'm actually teaching a course at night right now at boot camp,
Hmm.
and I'm having to write a bunch of for loops, and I'm like not used to doing it without having snippets and stuff.
Yeah.
And I hate it. Like it's so tedious, and it's just that's a small example of just like the boilerplate code that you write in general. It's like I would rather somebody else just do this for me so I can do the more fun parts. But the downside is, but you get to a limit, right? If you
Hmm.
don't have control over it, then at some point you're gonna need to do something more. So that's kind of, I would say, like an ongoing balance that that frameworks are gonna struggle with.
For sure.
Trezzy Codes commented that they have converted a lot of people from Gatsby to Next because it's in asterisk so much easier. Nice. Vader request built a Next.js template with accessibility. Wait, what is 1L8N? That's not accessibility.
Oh,
Or it's not ally.
internationalization.
Oh, there you go. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
cool.
I probably looked like an L.
Yeah. So monitoring analytics, CI/CD. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that. Um, Arpan is saying after hearing you speak, you've converted him to go and try out some more static stuff, which is good. Always good to hear that people are resonating with what we talk about.
Yeah,
Uh,
the nice thing about that too is like when you create a static site, I think a lot of people underestimate the benefits of static. Like they've heard of static in the Jamstack style space with static site generators, where that you're building a blog or you're
yep,
building something small. But when you strip back and you look at just the overall benefits of static hosting in general, it's definitely cheaper, in a lot of instances free. It's
yep,
more secure, it's faster, it never goes down. Like all these things, like if
yep.
your website blows up and it's number one on Reddit and Hacker News, like if it's hosted
Cool.
with a like a server rendered WordPress backend or whatever, and it gets a million requests, like it might go down.
Yep.
So that's the great thing about static, is you put it behind some kind of edge network like Vercel, or you put a Cloudflare cache on it or something like that, and it handles that traffic so easily.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the ease of deployment, which gets into one of the next questions here.
Hmm.
Is my favorite benefit of the Jamstack in general.
Hmm.
So a couple things, or I guess just one before I get to that question. Chillaxator, shout out to Chillaxator, gave me a hello. I'm sorry I'm behind in the chat, so hello. Thanks for being here. And Mansav is saying, so with Next, I assume you need an actual server like Heroku or DigitalOcean Droplet. Can you host these on Netlify? So probably the first thing is like Vercel is optimized, and probably the easiest way to host your Next.js applications. But if you were to host it somewhere else,
Hmm.
what kind of options would you have?
Yeah, yeah. Shout out to Vercel.
Yeah,
We'll just plug it. But yeah,
we'll
it's
put that
definitely
one. We'll put that one first.
it's definitely the easiest way to do it. But the nice thing about Next.js being open source is that anywhere that can run a node server, so anywhere that can run Next Start can run a Next.js application. So we
Yep.
actually see quite a few people who self-host Next.js. So maybe they're at a large organization where they have strict security rules. Like, Apple uses Next.js and they're not on Vercel.
Oh, okay. I didn't. What do they use Next for? Like their main Apple page, like apple.com?
I think it's only marketing style pages.
Okay.
Like there was like a machine learning page, and then I think there was some kind of shop, like e-commerce style page. I
Cool.
can't remember that one,
Yeah.
but yeah, they have it in a couple places.
Nice. That's good to know. Trezzy codes. Personally prefer Firebase for auth and user profile. That's cool. I like lots of people love
Hmm.
Firebase. Also got a positive comment for Auth0. Trezzy, if you've used Auth0 before and you have any feedback, positive or negative, I would love to hear it. James Q Quick on Twitter, james.quick@auth0.com. Again, if you have any thoughts or feedback, I love to hear it, positive or negative. So if you have it, send it over. I think timing on Arpan's comments asking about thoughts on Next Auth was literally like right as you were getting into Next Auth as an option. So I
Hmm.
think we've covered that. Let me know, Arpan, if I missed that timing. People talking about hosting on Vercel. Again, shout out to Vercel being probably the easiest, the most streamlined, the most like made for Next host, but you can host in other places as well.
Yeah, one thing there, I think, stay tuned on the 27th for some really interesting updates
Ah,
related to Vercel and Next. There's going to be some cool stuff we're dropping.
okay. Sweet. I love little teasers. This is good.
Yeah, a little teaser, little plug.
Yeah.
We
Did
The funny
I?
thing is, like, we've been so busy just trying to make this conference so good that we have totally not had time to do some of the traditional marketing things, like, extensive tweets or blog posts or getting the word out. Like, really the majority of the marketing that we've done has been our ticket pages, which you generate a ticket and then people share them on Twitter, and that's been like a self-fueling
That's
beast
pretty
pretty
really
much.
cool. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that
So
idea.
so we should break. I think we're at like 68,000 people right now. We should break 70,000
Oh,
attendees
what?
by Tuesday, hopefully. So
Wow. That's
as
amazing.
far as far as we can tell, it's the second largest online, like, gathering or conference
Yeah.
ever. There was one other, like, I think it was like a women in technology meetup or something I saw on like a Hopin blog or something, and they
Okay.
had over 100,000. But other than that, like, it's just going to be massive. Like React
That's
Summit,
huge.
which
Yeah.
just happened, which was really awesome. I think they had like 20,000. So it's just, I can't even
Wow.
fathom the scale that
Right.
this is going to
Yeah.
be.
Well, that's what I feel. I feel like when it first got announced, and I threw a link to this in the chat. Let me grab it again just in case people are new and want to check this out. This is next week, next Tuesday. Is that what we said? The 27th?
Yeah,
Cool.
next Tuesday on the 27th. If you go to
Is
nextjs.org/conf, you
mhm.
can register, get your ticket, and yeah.
And it's like I think you nailed it with the ticket idea, because I saw so many people posting about it, and it just seemed like it was like the default thing to do that day or those couple of days was everybody go get your ticket for Next.js
Hmm.
Conf, because one, the
Yeah,
ticket is cool, but also the conference is going to be really good as well.
yeah. Shout out to my teammates at Vercel. They did an amazing job there.
Yeah.
I wasn't a part of that. Like, I joined about a month ago, and
Mm.
they had already polished that off and got it out there, and they did an incredible job with that.
Yeah. Fair enough. Question or comment from Demetrius about doing the Auth0 package or Next Auth. Like I
Hmm.
said, if you use Next Auth, you could also wrap Auth0, so you could still use Auth0 as kind of the authorization or authentication provider, and then use the Next Auth package. That way, if you want to swap it out for something else, you still use the same hook. So maybe that would be a good way to go. If you do that, regardless, let me know, and I'd love to help if you need it or just provide feedback or whatever. Let's see. Hello, Wake Arpan is asking about your thoughts on React Query. I'm assuming where you would go. I'm kind of new to this area. Is like the SWR, which is kind of the
Hmm.
equivalent. React Queries, regular React, and SWR seems to be what people use with Next.js.
Yeah, so I think it'd be helpful probably to step back here, and I'll just give like a quick overview of why you'd use these, because it's a little confusing for some people who haven't heard about this. But if you think about React, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, or whatever, when we considered application state, we thought of application state just kind of as one thing, right? And now as we've got further into the React lifecycle and ecosystem, we've kind of realized that we can separate it into multiple things. And you have, I mean, there's quite a few different ones, but let's just say data fetching state and then global application state. So
Mm-hmm.
data fetching, call some API, I want to cache the result.
Yep.
Global application state might be like search your current search value or light mode or dark mode.
Yeah.
And for the global application state, more often than not, you can just use React context. But then for data fetching state, this is where you had all those crazy Redux things that were necessary. Like you just want all you want to do was call some API and cache it, right? But um, libraries like React Query, SWR, and then Apollo for GraphQL
Mm.
specifically kind of all solve that same problem of I want to make some API requests based on some key, just abstract the caching for me and make it really easy to do that. Give me a hook to do it so that I can do it inside of my functional component and just totally simplify that process so that when all I get back is a loading state, an error state, or the data that I requested. So the difference between React Query and SWR is, as far as I can tell, um, I think that React Query has a bit more features than SWR, and then SWR has a smaller package size. So it really
Which makes
depends
sense. Yeah.
on what you want. If you want the smaller package and you just still need to fetch some remote data, then I would check out SWR. If you need some of the more advanced features that React Query offers, then it's also a really good option to check out. They were both kind of inspired by each other. Like the
Okay.
timelines, I
Yeah.
think they
Kind of
started at
match.
the exact same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I've always kind of had this question on how that caching works. Is it like the library is abstracting away the cache in the sense that it's basically doing what React context would do in general? Like as you make the
hmm
request, it's keeping that information, and then you can get it in other places, and you just don't care about how or where that information is tracked in memory.
hmm
Is that kind of it?
Yeah, I could be wrong on this,
Okay.
but I I think the way that SWR works, if I remember correctly, is it doesn't use React context because
Okay.
then you would need to wrap your application in like a provider.
Sure.
I think it uses like the singleton pattern to
Hmm.
store it just with JavaScript. And
Okay.
I believe the way the cache works is you define some key when you're making your request. So that might be like slash API slash user, or it might be something a little bit more complex. And then the library handles deduping and updating
Hmm.
the cache based on that key.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
So,
And I feel like I had a hard time early on realizing what people were using it for.
mhm,
And that is what my general understanding was. And there were a couple of things that different conversations that kind of confused that. Well, the one thing that is odd to me is I think both of them, SWR and React Query, I think do like kind of automatic refetching of data. And
mhm,
I never understood why that was the default action. Like I
mhm,
would rather tell it what, like I'm not doing like a real time application where I'm like
yeah,
display like constantly updating with relevant or recent tweets. Most of the stuff that I do is not that. So I didn't really understand why it would automatically go and make the API request again on some sort of cycle without me triggering it by default. Do you have any idea why that might
yeah,
be more common than not?
yeah. So I think that is primary, like the number one use case. Which, like, if you think about the Vercel dashboard or just any kind of dashboard where you have user-based content that needs to be updated, it's nice in that scenario where if
Hmm.
you click to another browser tab or you go somewhere else and then you refocus on the page, like your most recent deployments or your most recent projects or whatever
Will
just
come up.
immediately update when you
Yeah.
come back. Some people don't like that UX pattern. They don't like when the content changes without them um, initiating that. So if you think about Twitter, right, the way that Twitter handles it is the like see new tweets.
Yep.
So what you can do with these libraries is that's the choice it makes by default, which is great for like dashboards or things where you have metrics. I use it on my dashboard that shows like metrics about me so that when it just updates in the background.
Hmm.
But if you want to turn that off, you can basically configure it and then they provide a hook that allows you to like you can build your own see new tweets style
Yeah.
button where you just click a button and then it basically re-updates for you. So I like that, these type of libraries, it's a growing pattern, I think, in the React space, which is opinionated defaults and then really good, easy ways to extend or
Yeah.
override. Like Tailwind is another great example in the
Hmm.
JavaScript space, like great defaults, but if you want to override it,
You
like
still
here's how you
can.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I think I'm starting to wrap my head around it, and I used React Query I used in that dev desk site that I've been working on, and I think I kind of got the hang of it, and it makes sense with what you're saying too. Going back to the idea of Gatsby versus Next, Mansav a while back commented, so it's safe to say there's really no reason to use Gatsby other than their plugin ecosystem. I think, like, to be fair to both sides, like you can have a preference and it may just click with you. Like, one of the advantages I have in coming to Next is I had a bunch of experience with Gatsby, which gives me this idea of like how pages are generated, because you manually are generating pages in
Hmm.
Gatsby by calling like the create page API, for example.
Hmm.
So I think I had a little bit of that advantage coming to Next. Next.js has just clicked with me more. I would say the biggest benefit for Gatsby, especially until recently, is one, the plugin ecosystem. I think they, to me, really dominated, like, just plugin for everything, made it really
Hmm.
nice. And then also
Hmm.
the community, again, up until recently for me, seemed like it was bigger. Now I feel like I'm hearing more and more Next.js, which again makes it even more enticing for me.
Hmm. Yeah, the nice thing about Next or Gatsby is since they're both abstractions on top of React or Create React App or
Yep.
whatever, like a lot of that knowledge transfer happens between them. So if you know Gatsby, you probably already know Next and vice
True.
versa, and Create React App too. Like there are specifics of each one, but at the end of the day, like the underlying theme is like, if you know how to write good React code, you're probably going to be okay.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a great point. And again, like it may just come down to preference. It may just click with people
Well,
one way or
yeah,
another.
yeah, what I tell people is like, use the tool that you have the most experience with. If you are already a Gatsby expert and you're just pumping
Yep.
out marketing sites left and right, like then
Keep doing
that's going to
that.
be your tool. Like
Yeah,
just keep crushing it because at the end of the
exactly.
day, the code is a means to an end. Like the
Yep.
code is how you make your money and that's how you make your company successful. So whatever helps you achieve that as fast as possible.
Love it. So I have heard this. One of the things that people love about Gatsby is the Gatsby image.
Hmm.
Uh, I guess is it built in, or is it a separate
It's
plugin
a
you have to
plugin.
install? Okay.
Yeah.
So I had heard this before. Next is working on a similar thing.
Hmm.
Is there public knowledge of like how it looks like? There's a link in here to the discussion.
Yeah.
Where is that? Do you know right offhand?
Yeah, yeah. So there probably, man, it's probably been like a month ago. I think there were two RFCs, which is requests for comments, opened up on the Next repo for an image component and image optimization. And really, the idea here is we work pretty closely with the Google Chrome team for, their intention is there's a lot of people using Next, and they've analyzed some of those opportunities for improvements. And one of them that they found was image loading. And the majority of the web is a lot of images,
Yeah.
images and text. So
Yeah.
obviously, it's in their best interest too to make that better and to make it faster and to provide good opinionated defaults. So these two RFCs came up with a plan of including image optimization and how to handle images just directly in the Next.js framework. So there's no plugins, there's no additional setup. It's just a well documented, easy to use solution to provide multiple image sizes based on your user's device
Hmm.
or whatever widths you want to supply, and making sure that you're using all of the latest advances in browser technology for loading images like new formats and all that great stuff. So those have been open for about a month, and they're in progress. People are working on those right now, both
Sweet.
at Vercel and at Google, and some
Yeah.
community help too there. So yeah, I'm really excited to see those land. I think it's going to be a really big improvement to the Next ecosystem.
I think that's been one of the bit like, and we saw it come up here, like Gatsby versus Next. That's one of the things that people jump to is because they love Gatsby image. And to me, Gatsby image is super confusing to set up. Like, it's very beneficial, but I've never understood what's going on in the queries
It's a
and
lot of
GraphQL and
magic.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
and even like I don't necessarily mind the magic, but the stuff that I actually have to write just doesn't make sense to me. But like, it might just be me anyway. But that's one of the things that
Yeah.
and it's interesting that it came
So
up here, that just
yeah. So
like people are gonna want.
something interesting with the Gatsby, well, specifically one of the Gatsby plugins is Gatsby plugin Sharp, I believe it's called, but it
Mm,
uses Sharp for image optimization.
yeah.
So at least the current plan with Next.js image optimization is it's going to use Sharp to start, but it's what's really cool is some of the people on the Next.js team have been researching some kind of state of the art solutions for how to do image optimization with a much smaller library size,
Mm,
because like the Sharp package is really large. And there's some pretty neat like WebAssembly, WASM solutions out there that are
cool.
very similar to Sharp, but they're like,
Lighter weight.
90% smaller
Okay,
and
very
faster
cool.
too.
Yeah.
So I think the really cool thing to see in that space is how that will evolve. I think they're waiting until some of those things are a little bit more stable or tested. Then the great thing is then you can just kind of swap that out and it's all built right into the framework.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. I know that's something I'll be definitely keeping an eye on, and then people in the community will be super excited about. Arpan commented, so I have a Discord server, Learn, Build, Teach, and he is requesting that you join. He said he would love to have you. So if you're
Yeah.
interested,
Oh yeah, I will.
I'll send you the link. I'd love to have you obviously there as well. There's several big fans of Next.js, and we have like honestly just a really good community from my perspective of people being supportive, asking questions, and we've got a few people from different companies that like when those questions come up, they're able to chime in and give really valuable answers. So I'll send that to you if you're interested, and
Yeah.
we'd love to have you.
Yeah, I'm actually like just getting into Discord.
Hmm.
When I was doing my last course React 2025, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to kind of host the community, and I ended up doing a Discord
Oh, cool.
server for that, and it's
Yeah.
worked out pretty well. And now there's an official Next.js Discord server now too, which was launched for the conference. So I'm in that one as well. So what's another one, right?
Yeah.
Might as well join in and join the conversation.
Yeah. I would love it. And I'm going to throw a link to your to react2025.com in the chat for people to go and check out. By the way, I don't think I've been able to say this to you. I can't remember if I have or not, but your landing pages for your courses, I think are so clean and so nice. Like I think they look great. The first time I saw like the mastering next page, I was like, wow, that thing's legit. Like I was really, really impressed. So anyway, +1 to your landing pages.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of inspiration there from Adam with Tailwind
Hmm.
and Steve with Refactoring UI.
Yeah.
I purchased Refactoring UI the book, and it
Yep.
was super helpful for understanding some of those things. And then both of the landing pages for both of the courses use Chakra as well.
Mm.
So shout out to them as well.
You'll if you join the Discord, you'll become friends with James Perkins really quickly. Next.js and Chakra, you'll be best friends.
Yeah, nice.
Trezzy Codes commented about me being an Auth0. Used to be on the live coders team with Bobby. Yeah, Bobby used to be on the DevRel team. He's now on an education team, education content or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what the name of that is. But I got to meet Bobby at my training in person back in January, and that's one of the last times I've traveled. So anyway, question about the next auth package. Does it allow you to override the callback like Auth0 next does? So the hooks in the Auth0 next package, they basically expose the login, the handle callback, the logout hooks, and then you can call them. So if you wanted to do something manual, you could before calling those hooks. I don't know if Next Auth allows you to do that or not. I'm just not sure. I don't know if you know right offhand if you have the ability to kind of do some custom logic before a logout or a login or that sort of stuff.
I think so. Yeah, I do think that NextAuth has hooks for each event in kind of the life cycle, but I'm definitely not an expert on it. I've only messed with it a little bit, but I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
See, and this is the misconception about video content and YouTube in general. Like I see you talk about Next Auth. That was the first time I heard about it was in your video. And I'm like, you've got to know every single thing about this entire package, right? Like that's kind of the conception or the misconception that people have
Yeah.
about content creators in general.
Yeah, most of the time it's like, oh, this is really interesting. I like read through all the docs, I
Hmm.
build an example, and then I'm like, okay, well that's really cool, or it's nice to know about. Like you don't get as many options or opportunities to build large scale
Bigger, yeah.
applications and like really understand the intricacies of that, which was one of the cool things. Slight plug of my own course, but that
Do it,
was
yeah.
one of the cool things about when I was doing my last course was I said, okay, I'm gonna do something different here, and I'm gonna build an application from start to finish, and see where I stumble along the way.
Hmm.
And it kind of changed my opinion for how I put out courses or how I do content, because there's really, in my opinion, there's like two camps of people who do online learning and courses. There's the people who want a highly curated, high quality content experience that they don't have a lot of time,
Hmm.
and they need something that they're worth paying for from the industry experts, so
Yep.
that they can get up to speed. There's those people, and then there's also the people who are the code along. I want to build something. I don't skip anything. I want to go from
Yeah.
0 to 100. Like
Real quick.
don't include any. Yeah, real quick. No black magic. Just like show me how to do everything.
Yep.
And it's tough to make content for both sides.
Yep.
So I tried to do a little bit more of the show me everything
Yeah.
this time, and it was fun for something different too.
Yep. And I've learned, so I watch all of my content at 2 times, and I am more looking towards the way I approach content now is I'm rarely coding along. I'm well versed enough now that I'm just trying to get exposure to different things. Cause I know like you've been doing development for several years. You kind of know how things fit together and like categories of things that are out there, categories of things that you need. And I'm really just watching this stuff for like exposure. And then when I need it, when I actually want to use it, which a lot of the times I'm watching stuff I'm not necessarily going to use, to your point about like actually building applications. When I need it though, I at least know like, here's what's possible. Here's what I need to go look for. And then I can go put it all together.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, do you have, I think we originally scheduled for like ending right now. Are you cool with 15
Hmm.
minutes? Are you good
Yeah,
time wise?
yeah. I should have 15 more minutes.
Okay, cool. And I had someone on a stream be not embarrassed, but like send me a private message to let me know. You can cut me off whenever if you actually need to go. So just don't be shy if you need to.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
okay, cool. Trezzy codes about Auth0 and Firebase, basically referencing Firebase as being a nice option, especially when you're using the Firebase real-time database because everything just kind of works together. We actually had this conversation internally yesterday, and that was one of the things I said, where if you're already using Firebase, which is such a good option for getting up and going, having the database, having hosting, having authentication, when you're already in that ecosystem, adding authentication that's already there, just it makes sense. So I agree with your point of like setting that stuff up separately with Auth0 would be more to do. And that's just kind of one of the downsides for me as an advocate of this is I've only got one reason really to bring people or to show people Auth0's value. We don't have a hosting platform to say like, hey, you could host stuff and then we now have authentication on top of that. So I totally get that feedback. That
But
makes sense.
one interesting thing with that though is, you know, platform solutions like Firebase that provide all of the tools that it takes to build your application, like not only the data storage, the image hosting, the actual application hosting too, if you want, and authentication, they work great for a certain set of people and a
Hmm.
certain set of projects. But then if you are, you know, if you're FedEx and you're trying to modernize your stack and you don't want to mess with authentication because you don't want to do it wrong, you want to like you have certain security requirements like SOC 2 or all those crazy acronyms that you need to make sure that you're enforcing, you're much better off like leaning on some third party solution.
Hmm.
So for those level of people, you know, they can't as easily bring in the full platform, right?
Yep.
So for a provider like Auth0 that's doing just the auth piece, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the hardest things I think to explain is like the classic like it depends because
Yeah.
because it's just so crazy how when someone asks you a technology question, like more often than not, you need to ask like
A
four
lot more.
questions
Yeah,
back to
absolutely.
understand really what they want, how
Hmm.
many people are they building it for, how big is their team, is it a solo developer, all these type of things to understand their requirements, and then you can give the
Right.
most educated
Yeah,
guess, which is why it's
absolutely.
tough to say like, you know, you should use React or you should use this XYZ or this framework or this library. Like everyone has validity and use cases.
Yep.
So you have to understand really what you're trying to build, which I'm
Yeah.
sure you know all too well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never think like people kind of laugh like, "Oh, I'm going to give you the cop out answer. It depends." Honestly, it's never a cop out answer because it always does depend. Like something's
Mhm.
going to be better for a different use case and you need to address that or else you're just if you're just picking blindly and you're not picking for a reason, then you're probably missing out on some things that you may not have been aware of. And maybe it is the best solution that you picked, but maybe it's not. And just
Mhm.
thinking about what those needs are, what those wants are, make a big difference in that sort of stuff.
And then eventually you get to a scale where you're doing stuff that nobody else is doing.
And then it's
You're
like
like,
figured out yourself.
and then you build your own, right? Then
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I'm going to make my own database.
Yeah.
I'm going to make my own graph database.
And hopefully, I think people are a long way away from hitting those limits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question from Demetrius about any cool, good integrations with GraphQL and Next. Do you do much GraphQL?
Yeah, I do a little bit. For me personally, I like to use GraphQL request. Like it's like the most simple abstraction on a fetch that allows you to do GraphQL tag syntax or the query syntax. And then I'll use something like SWR or React Query to call those endpoints that I define, and then let them handle the caching. I
Hmm.
found that I don't know. I used Apollo for a pretty large scale project, and I felt like I got burnt a little on it,
Hmm.
just because the cache was really difficult to understand. Um, and I think that Apollo's use case is more for really large scale GraphQL applications. So unless you're doing something with that, I don't know that I would personally recommend it. Just after my experience with it, so I like GraphQL requests. It's pretty simple to set up.
Okay, sweet. My only experience with GraphQL is Gatsby, and it
Hmm.
was kind of thrown into it without really understanding what it is or how it works, because you get completely abstracted from the back end, right? Like you're just writing
Hmm.
GraphQL queries, which to me are still not super intuitive, but that's for someone who doesn't do a whole lot of GraphQL in the first place. And that's one of the things, the potential learning curves with Gatsby 2 versus Next is you're for the most part kind of forced into that ecosystem. You can get around it, but you're kind of forced into it versus Next. They give you
Hmm.
those hooks and you can use them in any way that you want.
And the inverse of that too is because Next is unopinionated in how you fetch your data. Like a lot of people don't realize that you can use GraphQL. Like
Right. Yeah.
we get a lot of questions like, how do you do GraphQL with Next? And it's like, well, any way
How
you
would you do
want.
it?
Like
Yeah.
yeah, it's like it's a pro and a con. Like it's not
Hmm.
built in, so then you get the option to choose whichever library you want to do. It's like it's all based around a fetch. However you want to do fetch, if it's GraphQL or if it's just a REST API, like it's fine. But I have a decent amount of experience with GraphQL coming from evolving a legacy backend that needed to be modernized into microservices. We went with
Hmm.
the approach of we had like 50 plus microservices, and each one was its own section of the I don't know, the domain of data. Each one did its own special individualized thing, and each one had its own graph, its own GraphQL server. And then we stitched those all together at the end just to get one big. It's kind of like the idea with Gatsby, right? It's like you just get one big unified graph
Hmm.
that you can query against.
And grab whatever you want.
Hmm.
Let's see. Somebody looking back, Bob the Lonely Turtle, after developing a large site with Gatsby, wish they would have used Next. Cool. Um, Comment from Arpan. Next has a migration guide from Gatsby to Next that was written by you. Is that true?
Yeah. We just recently put that out to help people understand. Like, there's just some small differences in like the API of Gatsby and the API of Next, and a couple different like if you've only been working in the Gatsby world, and then you need to be introduced to how data fetching works with Next. But the reality is, like I was saying, since they're both React based, the guide's pretty short, so it's pretty simple to do.
Fair enough. Which one? So I see there's a migrating to Next. There's a page on the actual Next.js docs. Is that the one
Hmm.
that you
Yeah,
wrote?
if you expand that, there's the migrating from Gatsby, and then that's the one.
Okay, sweet. That's cool. It's cool that like lots of people in here have already referenced your material and content, so they like are well aware of the awesome stuff that you're doing. Arpan also said that he purchased. Which one did you do the flash sale for? Was it for which course did you do that flash sale for?
Yeah, I did that for React 2025, which
Okay.
was it was an interesting idea. It worked out pretty well. I'd seen some other creators on Twitter do it as
Mm-hmm.
well, and I was like, why not?
Give it a
We'll give it
shot.
a
Yeah.
shot. Yeah.
I haven't done that, but I've been thinking about doing that. I have a hard time. Like I created a React and serverless, but not Next.js course several months ago back in May. And it's
Hmm.
hard after like putting a lot of time into something and then releasing it. It feels awkward for me to continue to push it like a month later or
Hmm.
2 months later. So I kind of fail a little bit in the the marketing side of that. but I thought about doing like a flash sale, and I jumped on yours immediately, and I
Hmm.
donated, I think because the mastering next one is a donation one as well, and I think
Yeah.
I donated for both of those.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's good stuff. Like I had seen it for a while, and anyway, yeah, I always thought it would be worthwhile, and so haven't made it all the way through either one of those. It's hard to make it through all the good content that's out there. There's
It's true.
only so much time.
Yeah, the way I consume a lot of the courses or ebooks that I read is because obviously I'm stretched for time a lot of
Hmm.
times. So I'll kind of look through and watch the specific sections that give the most interest to me, or the
Hmm.
specific section of the book or the video.
Yep, I agree. And like I said, I do 2 times speed, and if it's stuff that I'm familiar with, I'm like pressing ahead 15 seconds constantly. Like, all right, keep going, keep
Now that you
going.
said that, I'm like, I've never watched myself at 2 times speed, and I feel like I'm a fast talker. So I don't know if I'm just like,
Yeah. I can't watch a YouTube video that's not at 2 times. It feels weird to me if it's not. Especially my own voice. I go back and watch my voice or listen to my voice at regular speed. I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. But at 2 times I sound great.
yeah.
Question well, I guess a couple of questions. One from Rotararis. I don't know if you have a pronunciation for that, but design pattern to manage my auth. And the follow up question I think is, where do I add JWT logic? I think a lot of the
Mhm.
actual, well, I don't know. Do you have any insights in like JWT authentic or using that for authentication and how that workflow works?
Yeah, so the first question, like design patterns to manage the auth, I think it's a little bit what we touched on earlier, where you can either do client side routing or client side rendering or server side rendering. Those are in my opinion like the two design
Hmm.
patterns. If you're talking more granular than that of a design pattern, like JOTs or JWTs, I don't know. I say JOTs. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't.
it's probably 50/50. I've always said
Probably
JWT.
interchangeable.
Yeah.
uh, Jots or cookies, like or
Hmm.
stateless cookies. People who are much more back end experienced than me are very opinionated on those things. And for me, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. They're both fine.
Yep.
They both have different use cases. So that's another one where I think more often than not, I see people doing things with Jots versus cookies, but to each their own. Where do I add the Jot logic? I think I've seen a lot of people just do this through like a bearer token. So you use your Jot, it generates some bearer token, and then you have an authorization header that
Hmm.
you forward along in requests, and it's like authorization is the key, and the value is bearer
Yep.
space
The
whatever
token.
your
Yeah.
access token is. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, very cool. So that's exactly what I would say as well on the like how does the JWT get used? Like there's other logic for like where does it come from? In the Auth0 case, like once you log in, two things that you can get back. One is the ID token, which is kind of information about the user. Then there's also the access token, which is similar, but is more geared towards sending to an API to grant basically access to an API. So in that case, that's kind of what you're saying on our end, where on the front end, if you're doing single page app authentication in React, you log in, you've got an ID token and an access token in memory. And then in your API request to a backend, you would send that JWT, just like you said, in the authorization header, and then it's bearer space token. So yeah, that's very similar to what I would have said as well. The other thing is cookies and JWTs are not necessarily mutually exclusive as well. Like you can
Yeah.
include information, you can include a JWT as a cookie. And I'm working on some integration stuff with Auth0 and Netlify. And Netlify, when you do their RBAC, their role-based access control, which is Netlify uh, turning away traffic that doesn't include the right header, for example. Like if you don't want someone to get to an admin page if they don't have the admin role, you can set up a redirects file with Netlify, and Netlify will check for a JWT inside of a specific cookie, and it will look inside of the JWT if it's there, and then check for specific roles. And if they don't have the appropriate role, it will turn the user away, which is actually pretty cool. So in that sense, it's using a cookie to be able to track this information but the information itself is a JWT. So you can use those not interchangeably, but you can use them in combination with each other as well.
And the caveat there, right, is like you have to make sure you're not storing user sensitive data in
Hmm.
the JWT.
Yep,
And that
absolutely.
because I think then like if you do want to store user sensitive data, you can do like encrypted JWTs. Like
Hmm.
isn't it JWE or something? Like there's another acronym for encrypted ones.
That I don't know. I do like I know with cookies, and this is part of what I was working with as well, is you can make them two things. You can make them HTTP only,
Hmm.
which means they won't go across HTTP.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I always get these. So there, one is secure and one is HTTP only, and I always forget
Hmm.
which is which. So secure is requiring HTTPS, so it won't work
Hmm.
on HTTP.
Hmm.
HTTP only means you can't access that cookie inside of JavaScript.
Yep.
So like even if you got cross-site scripted, you wouldn't be able to grab that information, grab that cookie information because it's only for basically on the server is where you can access it.
Hmm. Yeah, it looks like there was a follow up for cookies
Uh,
related to stateless or stateful. So I think you can still do stateful cookies, but then you have to store the well, you can still. I think what they meant was sessions, right? Like stateless sessions or stateful sessions, and you can still do stateful sessions, but you have to store them on the server. That's my
mhm.
understanding of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, and this is where I don't know how this works in the Next.js world, but in a serverless functions world, you don't have a shared in-memory experience. Your serverless
Hmm.
functions go up and down. You like nothing, it doesn't stick around for
Hmm.
any guaranteed amount of time. So some like going back to like a regular node server, you can have persistent session and you could potentially store that information in memory, and it could be
Hmm.
like an association of like some sort of key that you give a user, and then that thing maps to like some sort of information about the user. You could store
Hmm.
that inside of memory, but in the serverless world, you can't guarantee that that memory is around. So you'd have to jump to some sort of database option or some sort of data store option. And things like Redis are used for like replicated caching and stuff all over the place. You could do that, but I think that's another reason why the statelessness of JWTs, having the information that you need, as long as it's not private stuff, having that information that you need in every request means you don't have to do any extra work. You don't need to have in memory state guaranteed to you. You don't have to go out to a data source or database of any sort. You kind of have it all there, which is why a lot of people, I think, see the benefits of using JWTs for that sort of stuff.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that addresses the other, and maybe this is the last question from Ultruendo. Why is that hard to say? Ultruendo? Is that weird to say, or is it just am I making it more difficult than it is? So
Altrendo.
or Trendo. So you mean saving cookie on the server? Is that even a thing? So
No,
you go ahead.
I
Yeah.
didn't mean cookie. I meant like the session.
Hmm. Yep. And your cookies, and I've learned a lot more about this recently. Of Ultra Nintendo. I like it.
Oh.
Your cookies will go back and forth with your request. So
Uh-huh.
your cookies are really stored on the browser, in the browser, and depending on the configurations, will go with a request to a backend, and then your backend would get that cookie. What could be in there is a session ID, for example, that will map to a session that's stored on the backend, or it could be have a JWT inside of it that has whatever information you need to know about the user.
Hmm.
Cool. Last comment, and I'm trying to get to a wrap up point here. You could theoretically save the state of an app on the server and retrieve it with the JWT. You could save state on a server if you're using a JWT. Most likely, it already has the state that you need. Um, unless, yeah, because otherwise, you'd really probably just have like some unique ID that then maps to the session that has all the information. You wouldn't need a
Hmm.
JWT, although you could. So you could do that. Yeah, in theory, you absolutely could.
Hmm. Yeah, the
Cool.
only other question I see is my portfolio site built with
Oh,
Next?
right.
Yes,
I
it
missed
is.
that one.
It's open
Yes.
source.
Okay.
It's open
Sweet.
source, so you can check it out on my GitHub.
And is it leerob.io?
Yep.
Sweet. I'll throw that in. And this site looks really nice too. I love it's just your stuff is really clean. I love it.
Thank you.
So, anyway, this was super fun. Two
Yeah.
of like my favorite topics. I'm glad you're willing to come on.
Yeah,
Hopefully we
absolutely.
can set up some more of this stuff in the future. I'd be really excited to do more of it.
For sure.
Next.js Conf is Tuesday, the
Hmm.
27th,
Yep.
and I don't know what this implies. There's some sort of exciting announcements and things coming, as you'd probably expect with a big conference. So make sure to check it
Yep.
out. And we've had a couple of links in here to learn Next.js and in the React 2025 courses that you
Hmm.
have. So hopefully people will check those out if you haven't already. And